guess without further ado, why don't let's talk about restaurant resiliency in the time of COVID. How do you think we help small businesses? I mean, how to help small businesses find themselves in a position where they can navigate this, where they can understand it? You know, what are ways that either of you could think of to say, you know, for smaller businesses that are, you know, where maybe the owners were, you know, English isn't their first language, people of color, how do we get that kind of information to businesses and owners like that, where they don't have an IT infrastructure, they don't have access to that kind of knowledge, they don't know how to navigate these things? Where, you know, what do we think?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, Andrew. And this is this question is now my job, which is so exciting. It's like it's my dream job. And I think that, you know, the most important thing is that these restaurants have to be at the front of the line when it comes to need. And we did a terrible job of that with PPP. And, you know, I'll be the first to say that filling out the PPP application almost killed me. And I am an English speaker and have, you know, had the benefit of education. So we need to be figuring out how to get this aid to people without all of the hoops that they already have struggled to jump through. And that's why they're so vulnerable right now. So seeing different, you know, corporate sponsors, community organizations, making sure that these restaurants aren't being forgotten, even though they don't have someone doing their PR. I think that's really important, and we're seeing more of that happen. And then the other thing I think is really matters is that these businesses are able to tell their stories. And, you know, traditionally there might be a barrier. It might be a language barrier. It might be the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. But I think that right now, diners really want their food choices to make them feel good. And part of that is having a relationship with the person, you know, who made your food. And so part of what I think is so effective about social media is that you can get, you know, an eye into the business and feel like you're part of it somehow. And so I think that as I think about recovery and the businesses that I am you know, fortunate to work with, storytelling and figuring out how to really connect with guests, especially new guests, is something that I lie awake at night thinking about.
So, yeah, I think we're stuck a little bit in a bit of a conundrum that we have many people who are really thinking conscientiously about where they're going to purchase food from, what kind of restaurants, what kind of community support, how is that restaurant vested in the community, how are they part of the fabric of the neighborhood, how do I want to support them? And then we have this, you know, we have this other thing about that is, you know, what is going to be the motivator for us to support those types of businesses. When I think back, you know, I think it was got to be 35 years ago when the slow food movement started in Italy. That was a response to companies that were not cooking from scratch. And if you joined the slow food movement, you had to prove you were cooking from scratch. And then you had a snail sticker on your door. And there became a great movement in Florence to only support restaurants that were actually hiring, training, developing cooks through chefs cooking from scratch. And you'd go to the concierge in the hotel, or you'd go to a guidebook about where to eat, and you could immediately go to that because that was part of what the community was trying to do. And I think, you know, in Irene's work, really working with these restaurants and trying to get them to have a bit of a coalition, a bit of a community. You know, we see this oftentimes in certain neighborhoods, you know, where we have a strong Chamber of Commerce in a small neighborhood. I think of Chinatown in Chicago as being a small community of restaurants that have stood together on lots of issues in their community and really getting people geared up for what the future is going to look like in those restaurants. And I think about people who don't necessarily know how to navigate technology. I'm not a tech person, but I do think that there's going to be needs in those communities for tech training in order just to get the public aware that they exist. online, and they exist to go because you're not going to see as much walking traffic if everybody is having their food delivered.
Right.
And I think the ghost kitchens are a good point about that, where you go to a website that someone has paid to be on the top of the list. You see a name of a restaurant you haven't heard of and you can't find where it is, but yet you can order really delicious food from there. And that's going to affect the communities of which might have had brick and mortar restaurants. I know that one of the ghost kitchens that I'm familiar with in Chicago, it was a French restaurant, then it was a Japanese restaurant that had a catering kitchen, but they have an Italian concept and a Mexican concept out of the kitchen now. But nobody would know how to find that or where to go. So I think there's some challenges ahead for people who weren't on any platforms 2 years ago or a year ago.
So, I mean, ghost kitchens is a great example of everything we've been talking about, right? Because it's a way of diversifying your revenue stream. It's an alternate revenue to bring in your building. It's a technology only based business, generally speaking. I happen to be literally starting last week in the middle of opening a ghost kitchen, which is a delivery only thing coming out of another kitchen. And you wouldn't know it was there if you were a diner coming in the restaurant, but if you're going online, I think the paying to be at the top of the page, Michael, I think, for anybody who's experienced that in the restaurant business, is the biggest sham and scam ever. I remember trying that years ago at a place in New York and saying, all right, you take my 40%, And then I logged on the next day and we were on like page 4. And I said, what is this? This is a joke. And I cut it off. Some of the companies are getting a little better about it and incorporating repeat business algorithms into there and coupled with ratings and things of that nature. This isn't a lot of the companies aren't heading down like the Yelp model, which is really a pay to play model. If you're a business and you're not willing to pay, then we're going to put up a bunch of bad reviews and bury the good ones and make you look like you're doing a terrible job until you pay up. It's really a strong arm business. It's pretty bad. But companies like DoorDash. So DoorDash runs a different type of algorithm that takes into account ratings and takes into account repeat guests and how many times people are clicking on it. And your placement on the list is based more on performance than anything. And it's certainly not a pay to play kind of model. But ghost kitchens, you're seeing them crop up. You've been seeing a lot of big players come into it. David Chang, made a big foray into there with Fuku over the summer. Tons of other companies, Chuck E. Cheese, look at Pasquale's, and Chili's is another big one that launched their wing concept as a ghost kitchen. So I think this ghost kitchens are a great example of everything we've been talking about, which is a shift to digital coupled with multiple revenue streams within the business. I personally see ghost kitchens as the future. I see, any restaurant, if you're doing it right and it's not some kind of burden on the business, on the core business, why wouldn't you do that? What do you guys think?
Because it has no soul.
Amen.
Oh man,
that's the whole thing, is we're going to separate the industry, right? This is who's passionate about what they're doing. What chef wants to be the ghost chef? I mean, David Chang was a very well-established chef who, if most people who are paying attention know all the great work he's done. And I'm not criticizing anybody for doing a ghost kitchen in addition to what they're doing. I'm just saying, I wouldn't want my resume, if I was coming out of culinary school and really wanted to be a chef, or I was training under somebody who I really respected, to then go say to my friends and colleagues in the industry, oh yeah, I work for so-and-so. It's a ghost kitchen. We just do to go. It's just lacks the joy that people have found in the connection of community and human relationships in restaurants for 400 years. We are an industry that is the fabric of the communities we operate in. We are what sets a neighborhood alive. I think when Todd English opened up in Charlestown, nobody was going to Charlestown. If you were on Boston side of the river, you went to Cambridge, you went to other places, but you didn't go to Charlestown. He created a neighborhood, a street. It became known throughout the country. And I think that we're not going to lose that. We're going going to recapture that when we can all be together again.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, I mean, there is a version of a ghost kitchen, I think, that still has a soul and still, you know, kind of meets the aesthetic aspirations of the chef and the team. But, you know, being realistic, there aren't going to be very many of those. There are going to be a lot of kind of plug and play, soulless ghost kitchens that proliferate kind of at a level that is, you know, more so chains and bigger restaurant groups. And again, my fear is like who gets left behind. That being said, we do have one restaurant we're working with that it's a Dominican concept, and they're thinking we should just set up a ghost kitchen that's Mexican food because people in Boston still don't really understand what Dominican food is. We use all the same mise en place. Like, let's just figure it out. And like, I support that fully. And I think that if there's still a story to tell around it, if it still has some kind of identity, then, you know, more power to them. But I don't think that's what the majority of ghost kitchens are going to sort of come out doing.
I agree. And I think I'm sorry, Andrew. I think we also.
No, go ahead. Because I'm going to rebut both of you in a second.
We also have, I think as a business decision, it makes sense. The same way I think, even though I would rather slowly cook short ribs in a earthenware container in the oven, I understand why as a restaurant decision for lots of things, consistency, labor, shelf life, why sous vide is very important and why preparation is going to become really critical. So a Dominican restaurant being able to do 2 different cuisines, I think is going to keep their product fresher, give them more volume, allow them to have more cooks, allow them to give cooks full-time work. So I think all the positives of ghost kitchens are really good for the industry, for the business person. But I think for many people, it lacks the joy of the experience of working in a restaurant, serving food on beautiful china and watching guests smile.
You're romantic, Michael.
And I don't disagree with that. And I'm saying that, I'm prefacing my rebuttal with, I don't disagree with anything either of you are saying. I don't think it has to be like that. The ghost kitchen I've been working on, we're partnered with the Mitchell family, Ed Mitchell, who's a very big barbecue guy. And we're doing a ghost kitchen. We're going to be on the cover of Raleigh magazine in April for this. And we're really putting our heart and soul into that to say, you know, we really want to serve really good food. It's uniquely different than what we're doing. We just don't have a building to do it out of, so we need to share this space. But I want to loop it back to, you know, we're talking about, and in my head, you know, when I say, you know, the small business owner, that family business owner, English isn't their first language. You know, I'm picturing the mom and pop Mexican restaurant or Ecuadorian or Peruvian restaurant. And, you know, to them, I guess, you know, what I would say is to them, that's a real business play, right? To somebody who's struggling to say, you know, what are the future of ghost kitchens? And, you know, to them, it's a real business play to say, I want to set this up in the back and I'm going to sell, you know, South American burgers out of here with plantanos or whatever. You know, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Michael, where it's a business play for some people. And for some people, it's a necessary business play. I don't think it has to be soulless. It doesn't have to be burgers and wings out of the back of a kitchen, you know, out of the back of a fine dining kitchen or something like that. I think it can have soul in the way that I'm trying to do the project down here. But I think it's also, it's a real business play. But you bring up a great point too on it's turning your inventory, it's keeping your product fresh, it's preventing waste, it's preventing all kinds of costs that most human beings don't understand the existence of in restaurants to the degree that they exist and the costs that they incur on that level. And so that opportunity just to turn your lettuce and your tomatoes and your, you know, and even just simple items like that, you know, people look at it and they go, oh, okay, you know, so you throw out some lettuce and tomatoes. I mean, these are hundreds of dollars a week on these, you know, I don't want to call them, for lack of a better term, secondary items. They're not your primary proteins. They're not the real expensive stuff. But, you know, God forbid you're actually throwing out, you're not turning enough of your short ribs or your burger meat or whatever it is. It's a way to turn the inventory and layer in a little more revenue to cover your labor expenses and your fixed expenses and all these things along the way. I think for some people it's a necessity, and it's a real opportunity as well. But back to for those who can really grasp the shift to digital and the expertise in the digital world that they need to have in order to make this a reality.
But I would add, we've been talking a lot about how to get food out the door and delivery platforms. But as another resilience, to your point, Andrew, I think what we're really going to be in the teaching mode for is teaching family-owned businesses how to use data to not buy too much lettuce, to not buy too many tomatoes, to not be disappointed that a dish didn't sell last week either. And menu engineering is going to be a really critical thing to resilience in the new economy. So we might not see as broad of a menu. That's the beauty of the super fine dining restaurant. They know exactly who's coming because they bought a ticket on TOC, and they know they're only serving this menu of 10 items. And they don't have to have 7 or 12 appetizers and not know how many of each one is going to sell. So we see in the casual segment a really huge need for the smaller businesses. It's even more important that they understand how to use a minimum amount of data, the sales abstract, what their product mix is, a manageable, easy inventory system to help guide their purchasing, and maybe change a menu item because the only way they can buy romaine lettuce in their marketplace is buy a full case, but they only have romaine in one dish. And so I think resiliency is going to come from really rethinking how we engineer menus, how we lay out a kitchen to minimize the amount of movement so we can maximize the productivity of each participant. And those things, technology is going to be really helpful for. And it's not super complicated technology.
And Michael, that's why we spend 8 of 16 weeks on cost of goods and profitable menu design, which I'm so excited to dig into. And I think something else that's, worth kind of bringing up is that it really is it's the tech divide. It's not the concept of a ghost kitchen that, creates an inequity. Because, for example, in Boston, for a long time, most of the Japanese restaurants were run by Chinese people. And I know this because I heard them speaking Chinese. And then you start a conversation and you figure out what's going on. By the same token, 2 of the other restaurants in our cohort are Mexican restaurants, but the operators are Dominican. And then think about, there's a Thai restaurant around the corner from my house where they have a secret menu, for Thai people who can handle, the heat and the funk and who want, those super authentic dishes that the rest of us are not ready for. So in a sense, these immigrant-owned restaurants are already working with multiple concepts and kind of marketing on lots of different levels. And so I think it is the tech divide that's going to affect the outcomes as we look more at these kitchens coming in.